What I'm really fascinated by is music is such an important part of your life, and yet you've ended up being an author. I mean, do you actually regret not making music yourself? Yeah, of course, intermittently you do make music, don't you? But
yeah, well, there's a lot of novelists I know, especially crime writers, who would much rather be in a successful band than be writers. And I did try it. You know, when I was 17, 18, I was in a band called the Dancing Pigs over in Fife with a few schoolmates of mine, and we used to joke that we were the second best punk band in Fife.
Who was the first?
Well, the Skids.
Yeah, yeah.
There were only 2 punk bands in Fife. That was the joke. But it turned out there were more than that. We just didn't know about them. So we would be maybe the 3rd or 4th best punk band in Fife. But I wasn't any good at it, you know. I mean, I got it out of my system, I thought, when I was sort of 18, 19. And yeah, I was a kind of quiet kid at school. I had friends, but I liked sitting in my bedroom. I loved listening to music. I liked writing song lyrics that we're never going to do anything with, and poems, and eventually stories. And storytelling was what it was all about for me. And then when I started writing the Rebus novels, I decided he would be a music fan, because I was, so that was nice and easy. And also because I thought it would say something about his character. The kind of music he listened to would tell us a lot about his character. So that all started, and then musicians became fans of the books. So eventually I got as close to being a musician as is possible. I got to hang out with them.
Without having to carry amps around.
Exactly, without having to schlep the gear around. Yeah. Or any of the falling out with the rest of the band.
I mean, was music the first kind of art form you're into? Because it's the most instantly accessible music.
I mean, I would have thought comics, probably. When I was 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, it was comics. It was Batman, Superman, Victor, Beano, Hotspur, Dandy, all that stuff. And I did try and draw. I tried to draw cartoons, but I was no good at drawing. And then about the age of 9 or 10, 11, I did get into music. And my sister had a Dansette record player. And you know, I would buy singles. I would save up and buy a single. And it was whatever was in the charts at that time. One of the first records I bought was Dave and Ansel Collins' Double Barrel, because it happened to be #1 in the charts whenever it was, 1970. So I'd have been about 10 years old.
It's quite lucky that was the one.
Great record. Still a great record.
Timelessly great record.
Absolutely brilliant record. Still can't make out what he's saying. You know, I'm back with the shake of a sobo, motari, vari, voro. What?
That's better in a way, isn't it?
Almost better. I mean, I've always been bad at making out lyrics anyway. I'm still terrible at it.
When you see them written down properly, you think, wow, that's just completely ruined the song for me.
Yeah, possibly, man. It's like, you know, it's like when Uptown Top Rankin came along. I had to buy it because it had my name in it. And I thought, what the hell are they singing about? See me in me dress and ting?
Yeah.
What's a ting?
Yeah. The greatest one-hit wonder ever, that.
Yeah, I know. Yeah. It was an amazing song.
So records like this, I mean, this obviously Uptown Top Rankin was 78, but these are records in the early 70s. Was this like a portal into another world from Fife?
Oh, yeah, totally, man, totally. I mean, I started buying the music press. I used to buy Sounds, basically because it was cheap and it had a colour poster in the middle. So I found out Alice Cooper was a man. I was shocked.
Yeah.
Because I thought Alice Cooper must be a really dodgy-looking woman, you know, a ropey-looking woman. And then, you know, and that would get me into the bands. And this was at a time before punk. This was sort of proggy times. And then, you know, going up from primary school to high school, suddenly you were around people that were carrying LPs around. And the LPs always looked amazing. But you know, it was like you'd go around to your mate's house and his big brother had some Frank Zappa albums. And he'd say, listen to this is really dirty, filthy songs. So he started listening to it because it was like sex education, was listening to Frank Zappa lyrics.
So it's quite a fast musical education. So by the time you're 13, you'll listen to Frank Zappa.
I was kind of, because I had this mate with a big, and also because Sounds was getting me into these, and I thought it'd be really hip to and grown up to listen to these bands nobody else really knows about. And Hawkwind were a really early one, because there was one week, I think, when something like School's Out was #1 in the charts, and Hawkwind were like 2 or 3. And I bought both those records around about 72, I guess it would be. And I've still got Hawkwind Silver Machine upstairs, the single that I bought. And that was spacey, and as you say, it took you to another world. And suddenly, your tiny little box bedroom in a coal mining village in Fife was a spaceship that could take you to distant destinations.
Which is quite true, Silver Machine. Which is
totally. Which is apparently a bicycle.
Yeah,
The Silver
it's about
Machine was a
motorbike,
bike,
isn't it?
or was it a motorbike?
Yeah,
I
yeah.
thought I have to go.
So
Yeah.
have you explained? I ruined the song for you now.
Yeah, no, because
Yeah.
I found it out later on, but I just, it's one of these songs I'd love to be played at my funeral because it just meant so much to me at that time.
Oh, it's timelessly brilliant. Isn't
And
it?
the kind of synthesizers, these whooshing noises and all this stuff that went with it.
Two synths, wasn't it? Yeah.
Well, I mean, it was just really basic things, wasn't it? And basic modulators and.
But they still sound futuristic.
They do. I mean, they created this, and also the covers were really important. So your Roger Dean stuff came along for Yes and stuff like that. And
Barney
Gentle
Bubbles
Giant.
was Hawkwind, wasn't it?
And and Barney Bubbles was Hawkwind doing great stuff for them. I mean, and just the sleeve art, you could sit and stare at it for hours and it would take you to another place as well. But around about the same time, I mean, I was very conscious that a lot of my mates, when I went up to high school from primary school, suddenly they were wearing Doc Martens and reading books called Swedhead and Skinhead. I thought, right, I better get into this as well. I don't want to be beaten up for being different. Yeah. And it was that whole thing about were you kind of prog or were you sort of hard rock? And then,
Was that the line in Five?
Well, I mean, it was TRex and Slade. And I think if you were into Slade, you then got into hard rock. And if you were into TRex, you might have got into prog. It was that kind of thing because it was quite, it was like long hair and glitter versus skinheads and docs. And I tried to sort of straddle both because I didn't want to take sides and didn't want to get alienated or be beaten up by the wrong side. So, and I just liked music. So I'd be listening to Slade and T-Rex. I'd be listening to hard rock like Deep Purple and also listening to the more spacey stuff. But one band that were really important to me were, when I got into high school, were Alex Harvey, sensational Alex Harvey band.
Is that because it was Scottish and it was one of yours?
I probably didn't even know he was Scottish when I first heard the band. It just was extraordinary, the kind of image, which was kind of vaudevillian hard man, you weren't going to mess with these guys, but they still dressed up almost like a sweet cover band,
How much of Alex Harvey would be in Rebus?
The kind of outsider, the hard man, all of that. I mean, he'd be a fan of the early stuff. They did get kind of cartoonish later on.
Yeah.
But the early stuff, Framed and Next. I mean, Next, I think I first saw on the Ogre Whistle Test. I don't know, aged about 12 or 13 probably when he did it. And with these guys playing violins dressed in rubber masks. And I just thought, and the lyrics were all about kind of gonorrhea and people having sex in brothels during the war. And you're going, whoa, this isn't status quo. And so I remember buying Next and then trying to find a stripy black and white shirt, which I couldn't find anywhere. I got one, but the stripes were too thin. It wasn't quite an Alex Harvey one. And just got, I got into the whole program and went to see Alex Harvey live. And the program then at the gig was a cartoon book, like a comic book. And I just thought that kind of clicks with me. And the band all had separate identities. And there was that mix of, as I say, vaudeville or kind of showmanship. But also he'd be out there spray painting Vambo Rules OK on the wall.
Everywhere, wasn't it?
And then crashing through it. Yeah, and it was this was at a time of gang culture. Tiny Sally were the kind of Glasgow band that a lot of people in Fife wanted to be part of. And there was a lot of Hell's Angels stuff around as well. When I was eventually in a band myself, at Dancing Pigs, we only had two fans that were Hell's Angels from Satan's Slaves, which were the kind of big Scottish or Fife Hell's Angels chapter at that time. And they would come and sit and watch us in a very intimidating manner while we practiced.
What kind of music were you playing in the band?
The Dancing Pigs, God bless them, started off as a punk band, but our keyboard player wanted to be David Sylvian. So we morphed along with him into a kind of new wave band with lots of kind of hand-built synths. He built his own synthesizers. He was a genius. He would get these electronics magazines and buy the parts and just build them himself. And he sort of treated our violins so that he could sort of play that and it sounded kind of spacey and
That's
everything.
very 70s thing as well, wasn't it? Making your own synthesizer.
Yeah,
Does
from
anyone do that
electronics
now?
magazines.
Yeah, that's what Barney out New Order did that as well, didn't he?
Yeah. And it was just a thing you did because it was much cheaper than buying a Korg or a Moog or whatever was available at the time. We'd gone from ELP, who had these racks of keyboards. You thought, well, I've not got the money to do that, mate, so I'll just have to build it myself. That was the lovely thing about punk. I mean, punk came along at just the right age for me. I was 17 in 1977. And there was no way I could be in a band that was a prog band. We didn't have the musical ability or the gear. Punk came along and said, you don't need that. You just need a bit of attitude and just go out there and do it. Give it a go. You're from a Fife mining village, doesn't matter. You can't afford instruments, doesn't matter. You can't read music, doesn't matter. You got some attitude, you want to be in a band, be in a band. And I just thought, okay. And that fed into everything. That fed into thinking you can be a writer, you can be published, you can try and do a magazine. You know, I arrived at Edinburgh University October 78. The band playing Freshers Week were the Ramones. So I went and saw the Ramones play at this little sweaty student refectory. John Peel would bring his roadshow. Peru Boo would be playing, supported by the Human League when they were still a sort of three-piece. And in the middle of all it was me going, well, I'll try and be a poet. I'll try and start a magazine. I'll write for the student newspaper. I'll review films for the Film Society. And nobody will tell me not to do it. And I'd write to John Peel. You know, it's Dancing Pigs sent our tape to John Peel. We never played it, but we sent the tape.
Yeah.
You know?
He would have listened to it, though.
He possibly would have, and it'll be in the archive somewhere. I don't think he threw anything away.
So that was a great thing that people always miss about punk, the empowerment, this idea that anybody could do anything they wanted. Even if they're rubbish at it, they could still do it. Now you have to go on a course to do things, don't you? But then, for a brief moment of time, everybody could have a go.
I mean, sadly, we seem to have gone back almost to that era where now you've got to, you know, come from money before you can afford to have the free time to do this stuff and afford all the gear you need to do stuff. Back then, you'd go on a dole, wouldn't you? I mean, you'd either be a student with a full grant, which I had. I was getting paid to go to university, great days, and I was getting paid more than I could spend. I was on 300 quid a term, 30 quid a week, to go to uni. Or I'd mates that were just on a dole, and on a dole you'd start your band, and you'd go and sign on, and then you go back and practice with the band again. That was an extraordinary sort of moment. When people from all different walks, well, from working class walks of life, could try and do something different that would take them out of that world, that quite narrow world, and sometimes quite a stifling world. You know, I mean, growing up in Cardendale, I had a girlfriend who lived two buses away, and when I changed buses in Lochgelly, I was in fear of my life. You know, because they could see I wasn't
the villages all
there.
hated each other.
The villages hated each other.
Yeah.
And we were Y Hill. Bow Hill was Y Hill. That was our but Lochgelly had a much better gang name. They were called the Young Lochgelly Mental.
Oh, that's great. Was that sprayed on the walls as well?
Yeah, and you'd have the Y, and then the bottom of the Y would become the L. You'd have a cross stroke, so you've got the Y and the L, and then the M would come off the two upstrokes of the Y to make the M. It's quite clever.
Got to have a good logo.
Quite clever.
Yeah.
I mean,
Too hard to be in a gang.
Yeah, I know, really. I mean, that was great. That was proper tagging.
The Richard Jobson film about gangs.
Yeah.
Yeah, and did that bring back a lot of memories?
Yeah, it really did. I mean, Jobson was a Dunfermline boy. I mean, he was. I grew up in Cardendale, but I went to school in Cowdenbeath, which is the same school that Stuart Adamson went to. He was about 2 or 3 years above me, the guitarist from.
Oh, was he Cowdenbeath?
He went to school in Cowdenbeath, and Jobson was Dunfermline, so they were kind of really local. I remember the first single coming out, Charles, which was on a little tiny indie label, and it was I think it was a electrical shop in Cowdenbeath. That was the guy that ran it that put the single out. I can't remember. That's certainly where I bought the single. And it was great. And it was like Charles had a job in a factory, and it was kind of all the stuff that we were going through. You know, if you weren't brainy when you left school, you were going to have to get a job in a factory or join the police or join the armed forces or something, or go in the dole, because there weren't that many jobs around.
So did the Skids mean a lot to people in that area? I mean, it was such a great band, and it felt fully formed when it appeared.
Totally. And I mean, you know, Stuart Adamson was such a phenomenal guitarist. You know, much revered by people like The Edge, from U2 and various other people.
I think revered's a generous way of saying copied, really, isn't it?
Kind of. Maybe no comment. But he went off and did that brilliant thing with Big Country, where he made the guitar sound like a kind of instrument of war. It was like the bagpipes, wasn't it? It was like the skirl of the bagpipes.
Which he hated people saying, actually.
I know, but it really was. It had that kind of marching, stomping thing going on there that fed into a kind of a Scottish identity, but became a big international hit. Between them and Simple Minds, I mean, at one time they could have ruled the world, you know? I mean, Simple Minds had come out of punk. The first album,
Johnny
Life in a Day, is very
Self-Abusers.
punk. Yeah, Johnny the Self-Abusers, who I'm pretty sure I saw play the Student Union in Edinburgh. But then they got really experimental really quickly, didn't they? I mean, the second album, Real Cacophony, was really European and experimental. And then stuff like I Travelling, that came along later, and there was that kind of disco beat to it. But these bands were learning quickly, and the thing is, there was no boundaries, no barriers. You couldn't just put them in a niche, because as soon as you did, they did something different. And I loved all that. I loved
Richard Jobson is a great example of this.
Yeah, I mean, he went off. I mean, what did he do? He went off and he suddenly became a fashion model.
Yeah.
And then he was in other bands, and he was presenting TV shows, and he was travelling all around the world, and then he became a filmmaker, and he went, you know, he's restless.
All self-taught as well.
Yeah, totally restless. I mean, he does a thing, he goes to film students and shows them how to shoot a film on an iPhone. He says, you can just do it on your phone. You can make a film on your phone. You don't need money. You don't need the studios. Just do it yourself. So that is still the punk philosophy shining through.
I also think there's something about people from small towns that's even more empowered by these things, and they go further. You know, in a city, it tends to be a bit easier. There's like an infrastructure where people can help you. But if you're Richard Jobson Dunfermline in 76, 77, or you in Cowden Beath, you have to stick your neck out a lot further, don't you, really? Because there's only one of you, isn't there, really?
I suppose that's it. And, you know, and is that, you get that gallousness where you'll head off down to London with your tape and start knocking on the doors of record companies, which happened with Orange Juice and stuff like that, you know, the kind of the Glasgow sound. They would just go and knock on doors and get knockbacks a lot of the time, but they would, you know, go up to John Peel and say, you should be listening to us. Because
you got nothing to lose and everything to gain.
And it was a night bus down and a night bus back.
Yeah, but a lot of people talk about that, especially in Scotland, because it was such a long way those days, wasn't it? 8-10 hour journey.
Yeah, and you know, you'd be on your mum and dad's telephone, making telephone calls to people if you could get the phone numbers. But how did you get the phone numbers? How did you get the phone numbers? You didn't. So you had to go down to London and start knocking on doors.
So how important was Fife as part of your background? You know, is you know, some people like they completely, where they came from, they just like remove it from themselves.
Yeah, I mean, I don't get back through to my hometown very much, you know, weddings and funerals usually, or making documentaries for the One Show about the street I grew up on. But I still keep in touch with old school friends. And Rebus himself, I decided early on, my character would come from the same place I came from. And he has that perennial outsider thing going on, and I think I still do. I mean, if anybody says, where are you from? I'll say I'm from Cardenden. In fact, I wouldn't even say, Cardenden. There were 4 villages, Ochterdern, Bowhill, Cardenden, Dundonald, A, B, C, D, that then comprised this bigger place called Cardenden. And then, you know, I went to the high school there for 2 years, and then because I was clever, they said you can go up to a high school in Cowdenbeath where they will prep you for going to college or uni. Nobody in my family had gone to college before. So the clever
kids go to Cowdenbeath?
So clever. So Ochterdern, you left school at 16. You could do O levels or O grades as we called them, but you couldn't go beyond that. The high school in Cowdenbeath did you up to 18 and prepared you for the next step to university. So we were you know, some of us were skimmed off the surface. And I remember a mate of mine who was cleverer than me in every subject except English possibly. And he went for this interview with the head teacher. And he said, well, congratulations, your grades are good. You can go up to the high school in Cowdenbeath. And he went, no, I don't want to do that. Because I'd have to get up early and get a bus. I'd have to wear a uniform. And I'd have to leave all my mates behind. So in that moment, this 14-year-old kid, no parents there, made a decision that was going to change his whole life, affect his whole life at 14. Which I've always thought about. I've always thought about that. You know, I was clever, got to go to Beath, and that did prep me for... I was going to, you know, being a working class and, you know, getting ready to go to uni, my parents thought, right, Ian's going to get a career. So I was going to be an accountant. I had an uncle in Bradford. My mum was from Bradford. I had an uncle down there, and he owned his own house and owned a car. And he was the only really we had who did both
so
of those.
So they thought, this is the route.
This is the route. So I was going to... And honestly, until summer holiday, when I was 17, I was going to study accountancy. And then I had this epiphany. I was at a RAF camp down in Lincolnshire. My older sister had married a guy who was in the RAF, staying with them, and I phoned my parents up to get my higher results, the things you do in Scotland when you're 17, and I'd only got a C for economics. I'd only just scraped a pass and got an A for English. And I thought, why am I doing accountancy at uni when I don't really like it and I'm not really very good at it, just to get a job? I should be doing something I'm passionate about. So I had to break the news to my parents that I was going to study English, literature. And they went, what kind of job are you going to get with that? And I said, teacher, which wasn't quite what they had in mind for me. Anyway, then I went off to various unis to look at doing English. And I remember going to St Andrews, and I said, what modern literature could I hope to study here? And this guy wearing a fucking gown said, Milton. And he wasn't joking. He wasn't joking, man. Milton was modern literature in 1977 in St Andrews. I went, not for me, pal.
It's an odd university, isn't it?
Well, it's changed a lot now. You can study crime fiction. You can study crime fiction there. Now.
Oh, so crime fiction's finally become respectable.
Become almost too respectable.
Is this because of the Tartan Noir?
Is it Tartan Noir? I don't know. I think it's just because better and better people have been writing crime fiction, and more people want to read it than ever before. Possibly, I don't know. But anyway, so then I made a decision I would go to Edinburgh, and went to Edinburgh Uni, and that was when things took off because suddenly I met other people from multifarious backgrounds, posh people, poor people, and they all shared interests. So there were some people who wanted to get into film, some people wanted to get into drama, some people wanted to be poets, writers, musicians, and you got to meet all of them. And you started to mix and mingle, and you started to try and do things together. And it was fantastic. The work suffered. I just scraped past second year. But by the time third year came along, everything clicked. And
And
then when I graduated, I went into the cold, hard commercial world and found there was nothing I wanted to do. Yeah. So I begged them to let me back, and they eventually let me back to do a PhD. And having got secured 3 years funding, they couldn't take it away from me. Instead of doing my PhD on the novels of Muriel Spark, I started writing my own novels. So the first 3 novels I wrote when I was supposed to be doing a PhD, and the third one of those was the first Rebus novel.
I mean, was that a conscious decision to do that kind of writing? Or was it...
No.
When you
to
start
do crime fiction.
Yeah, when you start writing, it must be like, I mean, wow, where'd you go?
Well, the first novel I wrote, which has never been published, was a black comedy set in a Scottish Highland hotel. And the plot revolved around the kidnapping of a famous American novelist by the provisional wing of the Scottish Nationalist Party. Mm-hmm. Didn't get published. And then the second one was about growing up in Fife. That got published by a very small press. That was called The Flood. And then the third one had this guy Rebus in it, who was a cop. And I wasn't interested in crime fiction at that time. I just wanted a guy who could explore the city for me. And I thought a cop is a good way of exploring a city because he's got access all areas. He's got the backstage pass. He can talk to the richest in the land and the poorest in the land and everybody in between.
Now, this is something I was quite fascinated with, this idea that they are kind of crime novels, but really they're like an autobiography in the sense of Edinburgh, or...
Yeah, I think Edinburgh's the main character, and I think they're also predicated on a love of Scottish literature, a bit kind of dark, Gothic Scottish, and I think the crime novel in Scotland is definitely influenced by the Gothic. So stuff like Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde has been an influence on me all the way through. There's another book, one of the first serial killer novels, which was an influence on Jekyll and Hyde, is a book called Memoirs and Confessions of a Justified Sinner. Come on, here's a title for you. There's a title for you. Sometimes shortened to Confessions of a Justified Sinner, which makes it sound like a really bad Carry On movie. Remember those Confessions films in the 70s with Robin Asquith? Yeah. Confessions of a Justified Sinner. We'd go in with that lot. Confessions of a Window Cleaner. It was the least successful part of the franchise, was Confessions of a Justified Sinner. But it's about a young religious zealot who meets a charming, charismatic stranger who may be the devil or may be a figment of his imagination, and convinces him that he's going to go to heaven whatever he does on earth, up to and including murder. So he starts bumping people off, including his brother. And that's an extraordinary book, because you're never sure if this stranger is real and a psychopath, or is a figment of the imagination of this fevered religious young man who basically turns into a religious maniac. He turns into a religious, bomber.
Kind of like Fight Club.
It's got that vibe to it. Definitely got a Fight Club vibe to it. But this is someone who's told that because his religious beliefs empower him, he can kill anybody he wants who doesn't agree with his religion. So it's very modern as well. It's a really extraordinary book.
There's something quite Scottish about this.
I think so. Scottish literature is full of doppelgangers. It's full of people who are good and evil. And I got that from Muriel Spark, this person I was supposedly doing my PhD on. She wrote this book called The Prime of Miss Jean Brodie, very famous novel. And Miss Jean Brodie is both good and evil. I mean, she's an influence on the girls she teaches. She's quite a liberal influence on them. But at the same time, she's a fascist. She's a big supporter of Mussolini. And she sends one of the girls off to fight on the wrong side in the Spanish Civil War, And eventually one of the girls turns against her and turns her into the authorities, and then becomes a nun. It's a really strange wee book. But Miss Jean Brodie is descended from this guy, William Brodie, who you'll see around Edinburgh. There's a bar called Deacon Brodie's. He was a deacon of rights, he was a carpenter. But he was also a burglar. He would break into your house and steal your valuables. And he could break into your house because he'd made the keys and the locks for you. Yeah. And he was eventually hanged on a scaffold that apparently he had built himself. But in Robert Louis Stevenson's childhood bedroom was a wardrobe made by this guy. And his nursemaid would tell him the story of this guy who was good and evil. That's Jekyll and Hyde. So the story of Jekyll and Hyde starts with a real-life Edinburgh character. Edinburgh itself is a city, a Jekyll and Hyde city. You arrive here as a tourist during the festival in August. Great, it's fantastic, it's outgoing, it's effervescent, everything else. Scratch the surface and it's a much darker place waiting to be discovered. And you've got the new town and the old town. The old town, higgledy-piggledy, chaotic, not built to any rational construction. The new town, rationalist, built by people who knew what they were doing and wanted this kind of grid pattern and everything else for rich people to live in. So you've got the rich people in the new town, the poor people in the old town, the rationalist new town, the chaotic old town, Jekyll and Hyde. It's there in the structure of the city. And so I knew what I was doing when I wrote the first Rebus book, which was trying to write an updated version of that Jekyll and Hyde myth.
Is this something very much about the Scottish psyche is? Well, not just Edinburgh, Scotland itself, this good and evil, this...
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know exactly where it comes from. I mean, growing up in a small town, of course, you feel it. You feel cut off from where everything is happening. The other weird thing about Scotland is it's got this terrific, in inverted commas, history of serial killers and mass killers.
Yeah.
You know, we've exported that around the world. And that's very useful to you if you're going to write crime fiction. But you go, what is it in the Scottish character that has engendered this?
What is it?
I mean, Brady, Ian
Yeah,
Brady.
yeah. You sent him to us, thanks.
And yeah, I know. But you know, and there was this famous case, Bible John, who may or may not have been a killer in the late 60s. Some people still don't think he existed, but used to apparently go to Barrowland Ballroom, pick up single women, and then strangle them, and supposedly killed 3 women in the late 60s, which led to the Barrowland getting this notorious reputation. And I used him in one of the books. I used Bible John as a character in one of the first successful Rebus novel, Black and Blue, which also features the dancing pigs, John.
Yeah, yes.
I needed a band in that book who would be a kind of big U2 type band playing a Greenpeace gig.
You finally got to play the big sellout gig.
There you go. So I thought, instead of having U2 or REM, I'll bring the dancing pigs back and they can be a big band. Hooray.
It's quite interesting how you do that. You kind of blur the truth.
I love doing that.
Yeah,
I love doing
it's actually real landmarks,
Yeah.
which people like my mother loves because she lives in Edinburgh, used to live in Edinburgh. She goes, oh, I know that road.
You know that street, you know there's a real police station there, that's a real pub, that's it. And then you blur, as you say, you blur the boundaries and people read the books and get much more involved and much more connected to it because they know this is taking place in more or less a real place in real time. Another lovely thing is, I'll put real bands in, so I love Rebus listening to Jackie Leavin in one book because I thought you would love Jackie Leavin's music.
Do you think you like Jackie Leavin's music or his lifestyle?
Possibly both. No,
Yeah.
I think I knew he'd like these kind of very muscular guitar playing and these great lyrics of male hard men. These kind of, fairy tales for hard men or something, whatever one of his albums was called. And it's like hard men unable to show their emotions and stuff. I thought that would really appeal to Rebus, but with a kind of romanticised layer going on. What I didn't know was that Jackie was a fan of the books. And he was reading the book in Bergen in Norway when he was on tour and he saw himself mentioned and went, bloody hell. So he got in touch with my publisher, who put us in touch with each other. We met, we got on really well, and eventually ended up making an album together. Jackie Leavin Said, which was a 40-minute spoken word story that I did, taking on some of the themes in his songs, and he then wrote some new songs to go along with the story, and we did it as a gig at Celtic Connections in Glasgow one year. Then we were asked to do it at the Fringe in Edinburgh and did it at the Queen's Hall in Edinburgh, taped it, and it came out as a double album. And so we got to tour with it. So eventually I did get to tour. And you could go into FOP or Our Price or HMV and you could find my CD on the racks for a few weeks. Hooray.
Was that more exciting than getting the book made?
It was great.
Yeah.
It was great. When we went on tour, Jackie said, what do you want on your rider? I said, what's a rider? He said, it's your backstage stuff. I went, I don't know, I'm a writer. We're lucky if we get a bottle of water. I said,
don't you have riders in the
No, you don't have riders. I mean, I'd never heard of this before. I said, you do the rider. And I went, our first gig we were playing was the Royal Festival Hall in London, and I walked into our shared dressing room, and he was surrounded by white towels and a wee mini fridge bar thing, and booze and mixers and fruit and sweets, and my side of the room there was nothing.
Yeah.
And should I say something? And then this burly backstage guy kicked the door in and said, which one of you fuckers asked for a haggis? And Jackie just pointed at me. And his rider was huge. My rider was one uncooked haggis for Mr. Rankin at every venue. We played folk festivals, there'd be somebody with a haggis for me, and oh, please take it away. Yeah. He said there was method in his madness, which was it shows how far the venue's willing to go.
To book you. Yeah. That is the game. Who's in control of the corridor?
Exactly.
Yeah. And the fruit always gets left behind. That's the other cliche.
There you go.
Yeah.
But because of the success of the Rebus books, I've managed to get backstage to lots of artists' gigs, and I'm always kind of slightly disappointed, John. I mean, I still want that 70s rock and roll thing to be going on. And you go backstage, and it's the Manic Street Preachers, and it's like vegan food and bottled water.
Yeah.
And they're having a kind of light chicken supper, or backstage at Nick Cave. And it's just kind of, do you want some Thai chicken? And you're going, what?
The madness is on the stage, not off the stage.
Yeah, I know. Yeah. Everybody's looking after themselves too much now. And they're always aware, of course, very conscious now, which they weren't in the past, that they're paying for all this.
Yeah.
In the past, you all thought it was all free.
Paying for it financially, physically,
mentally.
mentally.
No, but financially, I mean, you thought it was all, free.
Yeah,
spiritually, yeah.
You probably find if you go backstage, you're probably flicking through your books now.
Well, actually, James Dean Bradfield from Manic Street Preachers is a huge reader. And he'd got in touch with me because he's a huge fan of Scottish literature. And backstage, that was all he wanted to talk about was Scottish books.
That's
and
interesting.
Scottish
to
writers.
actually
People that were really obscure. I mean, Ron Butlin, who's a fairly obscure, lovely guy. I've known him for donkey's years, but fairly obscure novelist. And it was one of Ron's books that he just wanted to talk about because it's written in the second person, which is quite unusual. And so it was lovely. But yeah, the most literate band you'll ever come across. The libraries gave us power.
Yeah. It's a great song, great lyrics. So with Jackie Leaving, it's interesting because he's was a very literate writer as well.
Yeah. He loved working with writers, poets and stuff, and he loved to bring them on stage. We did a gig at the Hague, at that Den Haag, what's it called, that Crossing Borders Festival. And I think the headliner was David Sylvian that year, doing a solo gig. But he had me on stage with him. He had a Kieran Carson, who was a Northern Irish poet, doing stuff. And he had done David Thomas from Pere Ubu doing stuff as well.
All on the stage.
Four of us on stage at the same time.
That's kind of interesting.
Plus Jackie Eddie's
David
keyboard
Thomas
player.
is a handful, isn't he?
David Thomas is a handful. He's a I've met him a few times now. He's a handful. He's a lovely guy, though. Lovely guy. Getting some quite contentious conversations with him.
Yeah, which is good.
Great.
Yeah.
Great.
So do you find when you work with these people, because they can compress everything into 3 minutes, a story...
I'm jealous. I'm jealous of poets.
Yeah.
And poets are lyricists, right? I mean, song lyrics are poems. I mean, the great poets, the good poets, can say in a line what it takes me a book to say. And
they're both different disciplines, but I'm just interested in the art of writing as well. Because you're about to start another book, aren't you?
Yeah, I've got to start another book soon.
And what's that feeling? Is it a feeling of trepidation before you start again?
Completely. Yeah. I mean, it doesn't get any easier. It gets harder as I get older. It gets harder. I thought it'd be like stripping a car engine. Once you can do it, you can do it blindfold. But no, writing a book just gets harder and harder. Partly because I'm getting older, so the brain isn't sparking the way it used to spark. I used to be able to sit at my computer for 10 hours at a stretch and just write. And now after about 45 minutes, I'm knackered. And I'm getting up and stretching. My knees are going. My back's going. And just my brain is a lot kind of squishier than it used to be. And so I'll get up and go for a wee walkabout, make a cup of tea, come back, try again, do a bit more. But I'm doing it in kind of 45-minute bursts now rather than 10
It's amazing
hours.
how interesting hoovering a carpet can get when you've got to write a book.
Or just getting your CDs in order, just alphabetise my CDs. I'll just dust my books, dust the bookcases.
I mean, do you have a process before you actually sit down? Do you walk around the block or do you listen to a certain record?
Yeah, I'll put off the evil moment forever. I mean, I go to the cafe, get coffee, get the paper, read the paper, do the crossword, check my emails, check Twitter, and eventually around about 11 o'clock, sometime between 11 and 12, sit down and think, well, it's almost lunchtime. I might as well just break and just, I'll start after lunch. Because it's nerve-wracking. I mean, I'm absolutely terrified that this time the book is going to be completely terrible.
Is that the fear of letting the readers down, or the fear of letting yourself down, or letting Rebus down?
Part is getting found out.
Yeah.
Getting found out. Because none of us, nobody that I know in any creative profession, possibly including yourself, thinks we're doing great stuff. We think we'll get found out. This is ridiculous. We'll get found out eventually.
First time I met Joe Strummer, within 1 minute, he said that to me. His biggest fear was getting found out.
Yeah. Everybody says it at some point or other in a conversation. You talk to poets or you talk to musicians, filmmakers, you name it, actors. I'm always afraid I'm going to get found out. And I mean, one of the reasons that I'm glad I'm a successful novelist is it's really hard to be a successful poet. It's very hard to make a living as a poet. You've got to be doing university work or doing something else. But as a novelist, especially writing crime fiction, I think this is part of the reason why I did turn to crime fiction quite early on, was that I wanted to make a living doing it.
Oh, so it was a practical consideration?
I think it was. I think it's a working class Protestant Scottish thing. I wanted to be doing something that people wanted, not something that had to be supported by the state or had to get another job. I wanted to be a full-time writer. How can I be a full-time writer? I'll write commercial fiction.
It's interesting because you worked in what was commercial genre, but you put the art into it as well, and you combine the two, which I guess is probably the kernel of the success.
I like that. I mean, I do like that everything I want to say about the world or every theme I want to explore about the world can be contained in that genre.
It's an interesting discipline.
Well, yeah, there is. I mean, I like the structure of the crime novel. It's got a 3-act structure. It's crime, investigation, resolution, and I quite like that because within those fairly tight confines, you can still do a lot, and you can push boundaries. And a lot of younger writers are doing amazing things with the crime novel. Look at David Peace, the way he's sort of stretched the crime novel, influenced a lot by James Ellroy, has taken the crime novel into different places. I've got his latest book upstairs. I just got sent it recently. It comes out in April. It's a very different kind of book from the ones he's written before. But, I love that the crime novel can be experimental, but people come to it and can still get a lot of pleasure from this moral universe. I mean, it's taken on very big questions of good and evil. It's saying to the reader, why do we human beings keep doing terrible things to each other? A very easy question to ask. and it's given you sort of pointers as to where the answers might lie. We'll never get to the bottom of it, I don't think, that question of why we do terrible things. But we enjoy exploring these very big moral questions.
Does there have to be a resolution
then? Some readers want it.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, I remember writing one early Rebus book, I think it was Let It Bleed, and it's got a very open ending. And when I took it to my publisher in the States, they went, oh no, we need an extra chapter.
Well, that's the Americans, isn't it? They always have to have everything tied
we want
up.
closure. And a lot of people do come to the crime novel for closure, because it gives you a closure that isn't always there in real life.
I used to love the Sweeney because half the time...
But he's got away with it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you could never work out if Jack Regan was actually as bad as... We should do a Rebus as well.
Yeah,
like
Regan, I mean, it's
line.
definitely something... Although I didn't read crime fiction before I started writing the Rebus books, I did watch all the cop shows. So the Sweeney was amazing because it was much darker, much darker. Yeah. I was also a big fan of Columbo because it was a very interesting setup because you, the viewer, knew more than a detective from the get-go, because the first thing he'll do is show you the crime and how it happened. And then they'll bring this guy in, and you know more than he does, which is very unusual. So
the fascination is watching him try to catch up with you.
Yeah, but also it's a very anarchistic TV show and a very working class TV show, because here's the shambling working class guy with a crap car and the kind of old shabby raincoat, and almost always the villain of the piece, the killer, is from the upper classes. It's from high society in America. They're film producers, or they're kind of diamond merchants, or they're something like that. And this shabby working class guy will bring them down.
Is this something that appeals to you from
Totally
Five?
appealed to me.
Yeah,
totally appealed to me. And Rebus himself is a bit of an anarchist. If you're a kind of, professional criminal who's in it because you need to put food on the table, Rebus will give you a hearing. If you're rich, successful, whatever, and you do it because you think you're going to get away with it, he will come down on you like a ton of bricks. You know. Yeah. So he's got something of the Columbo in him, I think.
Yeah. And is that a Scottish thing as well? Is there
I don't know.
A weird Scottish moral code thing going on there?
I don't know. Maybe.
People do, not just Scotland, people do respect grafting criminals.
But I mean, the other thing people like is people like the Maverick cops. You know, I mean, look at Life on Mars. I think in Life on Mars, when it was originally envisaged, the TV show, we were supposed to be on the side of the politically correct young cop, John Sim, who's transported back to the 70s. To when the cops would slap you around in an interview room and there'd be a bottle of whiskey in the bottom drawer of the desk, and they would make stuff up to try and put you away. But when viewers started watching it, Gene Hunt became the hero, didn't he? Because everybody wanted that. That guy was just so more charismatic and dangerous, and the Maverick. So the charismatic, dangerous Maverick is what people want, which is why I think they're letting him down when they come to Edinburgh looking for Rebus and they find me instead. Because I'm not charismatic, I'm not a Maverick, and I'm definitely not dangerous. So I'm letting the side down by not being Rebus.
When you write a book like that, when you're doing a character like that, do you inhabit the character at all? Is it such a separate thing? Is it just schizophrenia? I mean, do you admire
It's more like quadrophenia.
Well? Yeah.
It's more like quadrophenia, because all these characters are me. You know, Cafferty, the villain who runs Edinburgh, is me. Rebus is me. Siobhan Clarke, Rebus's college-educated sidekick, is me. Malcolm Fox, the kind of goody two-shoes internal affairs cop, is me. They're all parts of my personality. They're all aspects. They must be. Where else did they come from? You know, these aren't real people, so they're coming from inside my head. So it's more than schizophrenia. It's more than quadrophenia. And, you know, if writers didn't get all this stuff down on paper, we might be very screwed up individuals. Because there is something also quite cathartic.
Or is it like opening a Pandora's box sometimes?
I don't know. I think it's a way of earthing all that crap that's in your head, you know?
So in a way, the book is your stage, isn't it? So like, if you're a musician...
Or it's my psychoanalyst couch.
I
can lie on the couch. Or I can give all the crap to Rebus. So, for example, when my son was born disabled, and we were told he'd probably never walk, he'd be in a wheelchair all his life, my first instinct was to have Rebus's daughter be hit by a car and put in a wheelchair. And I did that as a way of dealing with it. And I felt really bad afterwards about it, about doing that to Rebus and his daughter. But it was a way of dealing with it. And so all this fiction, all this writing has been a way of kind of dealing with all that darker stuff in my head. Which is why, you know, writers could be pretty screwed up individuals if we didn't have that outlet. And, you know, people say, oh, but you've made millions of pounds from your books, J.K. Rowling or John Grisham, whoever. Why do they keep writing? Because it's fun, and it's how you make sense of the world, and it's how you channel all that stuff away from you, how you sort of deal with all that stuff in your head. So why would you ever stop? And also it keeps you childlike, it keeps you young. We were all young once, and we were all kids, and we all had these imaginary friends and amazing adventures that happened in our creative imaginations. And then at some point the adult world said, you've got to stop doing that now. You've got to get a job, put away childish things. And writers and creative people just go, no, You know, specifically writers, because we're still making up these stories that we all used to do, role-playing games we all used to play.
But even though it's great, it's still that thing where you have to do it, which is difficult, isn't it?
Yeah, well, when you're doing crime fiction or genre fiction per se or commercial fiction, the audience do demand a book a year pretty much, and that's pretty tough when you're spending half the year on the road touring with the previous book. How do you sort of manage to find time? And the more successful you get, the less time you actually get to sit down and write the book. So I've gone from writing 2 books a year when I was poor to now writing a book every 2 years. So it takes me 6 months to write a book. So the rest of the time is time when I can be walking away from it and doing the touring and doing other things. But also it's because I'm slowing down. I mean, I really am slowing down. The ideas don't come as fluently as they used to come. When I was a student at Edinburgh, I'd be getting ideas for half a dozen stories a day, half a dozen poems a day, you know. And now I'm lucky if I get 1 good idea a year.
Yeah,
luckily,
that's enough,
that's
isn't
all
it?
I need.
Yeah. Do you feel sometimes you're trapped, like a band that's been going a long time, whatever, trapped by your audience expectations or the publisher's expectations?
You try and don't think about that. I mean, it's an odd thing where you try and push away the notion that you are part of a commercial enterprise, you are part of an industry, and you try and get back to that you that was in your bedroom as a kid having some fun. And I like hanging out with Rebus. He's a great guy to hang out with. I get to have extraordinary adventures with him. I get into violent altercations with him, which I try and shy away from in the real world. And he has great one-liners. I never have great one-liners. I think of the one-liner after I've left the pub.
Yeah.
No, what I should have said was, but you know, with him, I can spend weeks coming up with a great one-liner from him, and it seems like it just comes up.
So you can cheat.
Yeah, of course, you're cheating all the time.
Yeah.
But I just love that. I love it. I mean, it is, I don't know, why would you do anything else, man? I just wish my parents were alive. My mum died before I was ever published, and my dad died before I became successful. I mean, he was around for the first Rebus novel, but he wasn't
Which
around
is
for
a
the
success
second.
on its own. I mean, especially...
Yeah, I mean, I think he liked it. He liked the fact that there was a flood and there was noughts and crosses out there. There were 2 published books before he died, so he had something that he could physically see that his son was doing something with his life.
So, but you're also distracted by loads of other art forms as well. So, I mean, we could bring the single in here because you finally, well, you have made a lot of...
Yeah, I know, I've made a record, man. I'm so chuffed that I've met me and my friends who got together just to noodle and just have rehearsals and things, finally come up with one good song that we've made into a 7-inch single.
Well, you cheated. You got Bobby Bluebell now, who's actually a
Bobby
songwriter.
Bluebell is rhythm guitarist and backing vocals. Yeah.
So what are you doing in the band?
Vocals.
Yeah.
Lead vocals.
Can you actually play an instrument at all then? No,
I could do 3 chords very slowly on the guitar.
So in that classic punk rock style, the one who can't play anything ends up being the singer.
The front man.
Yeah.
I know, it's kind of embarrassing.
Yeah.
I mean, hopefully Bobby is kind of the front man. He's a proper professional musician. But it's just a bit of fun. But no, I was asked to do a graphic novel, a comic book by DC Comics a few years ago, so I did that, and that was great fun. I did a libretto for a 15-minute opera with Craig Armstrong, the composer, the Oscar-winning Glasgow-based composer.
Yeah.
And I did the libretto, he did the music for it. So tick that box. I've fronted documentaries and stuff. I've had a couple of cameos in Rebus TV shows, tiny cameos. I've written the blurb for a exhibition catalogue for an artist. It's been good fun. But at the end of the day, I'm a novelist. That's what I am. At the end of the day, you've got to put away all these things and sit down and think, right, the next book has to be delivered by June, so I better start writing it in January.
What would Rebus make of that single? Would he?
I don't know. I mean, he's probably not bought a record since about 1976. I'm joking, actually. I mean, he used to listen to Jackie Leavin, and Jackie was active in the 80s and 90s. But what would he make of it? I don't know, man. He'd probably like a B-side. The B-side's instrumental.
Doesn't like the singing.
It's not got me on it.
What would Rebus make of you if you met you?
I don't think he would like me that much. I mean, we could talk about music, and we could talk about Edinburgh, we could talk about football. I don't know, he's not that interested in football. We could talk about Fife, growing up in Fife. But he would see me as being a wishy-washy liberal who's basically never had to do a hard day's manual work in his life, or not much. Has
it ever been tempting, and this is such a postmodern thing, to actually meet the right, which is kind of a weird little twist, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I do.
In your head, have you imagined the meeting?
In a couple of the early books, there's mention of a writer who sits in the back room of the Oxford Bar, and people imagine that's me, but it's not. It's a journalist called Hayden who's a Irish Times journalist, and he sits in the back room reading the paper and scribbling away, doing stuff. So the writer in the back room of the Oxford Bar isn't me. No, I've not done that Mark Amos thing of meeting your character. I'm trying to think if I've even interviewed Rebus. I've not. I interviewed Arthur Conan Doyle once for a magazine, although Conan Doyle's been dead quite a long time. But that's the problem. The problem is no matter how famous I ever get as the author of the Inspector Rebus novels, I will only ever be at best the second best known crime writer to come out of Edinburgh. Yeah. Because Arthur Conan Doyle was born and brought up in Edinburgh. And you're never going to top Sherlock Holmes.
Yeah. But Rebus has become the most famous Scottish.
Oh, but Scottish-based, the most famous Scottish-based. It's like a kind of second best in a dog show, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's not quite best of breed. Most appealing face.
I don't know, Scotland.
Shiniest coat.
Scotland's a lot more than it was when you were growing up now, isn't it?
Well, you know what? It's kind of weird. I mean, we've talked about Fife, but I mean, let's talk a little bit about that, because Fife in the late 50s and early 60s suddenly produced these people who would go on to be, you know, Richard Jobson, Stuart Adamson, Jackie Leaven, the painter Jack Vetriano, one of the most famous living artists in the UK. Crime writers like me and Val McDermott. And I'm going to start forgetting people now, which is going to be embarrassing.
Gordon Brown.
Gordon Brown, the politician who became Prime Minister. John Burnside, the writer. I'm thinking more of artistic people. And there's another one, his name's escaping me now, an artist who does a lot of cut-up stuff, and I'm forgetting his name, and it's not Calvin, no. Callum, no.
We'll subtitle it.
Yeah, I'm really annoyed, but I'm going to forget his name. But, you know, it produced a lot of people who were very artistic, who came out of these little towns and villages in Fife. Why did it happen that way? I've got no idea, except maybe they were putting something in the water. Or were part of a cruel genetic experiment.
But it's got to be a reason, really, hasn't there?
There's got to be a reason,
or
it's an accident.
Coincidence.
It could just be an accident of history. I mean, it could be an accident of history that just at that time. I mean, I would love to think punk had something to do with it. I mean, I think punk did have something to do with Jackie Leaven, although he was around before punk.
They gave him a space to exist.
Doll by doll. I mean, you know, punk sort of gave him doll by doll, and that took him to a different place. And that, you know, just get up and do something was so important to Jobson and Stuart Adamson, and probably important to people like Val McDermott and me. You know, nobody could stop us doing what we wanted to do, or we wouldn't take no for an answer. Let's put it that way.
Did it make a difference being 20, 30 miles from Edinburgh, or was that like just that little bit too far?
Yeah, I mean, people talk about Fife as it's this weird place. It's shaped like a Scotty dog's head, and it's separated from Dundee by water and from Edinburgh by water. And people sometimes say you need a lang spoon, a big long spoon, to sup with a Fifer, because we're very close knit, we're very tribal. And I wonder if that was an influence or not. I don't know.
Just having it there, that close, would it?
The thing is, I felt different, and I had to hide that. I mean, right from the get-go, I felt different. All the kids I was hanging around with, you know, hanging around street corners trying to look tough, going to football matches, going to watch Cowdenbeath or Wraith Rovers or whatever, trying to fit in. You know, I became very chameleon-like, or very, very Jekyll and Hyde. So I would pretend that I fitted in, but really what I wanted to was go back to my bedroom and sit and write things down and listen to my Pink Floyd albums or my Alex Harvey albums or whatever. But I had to look like I fitted in, otherwise I'd be weird and different and potentially be pushed out from the tribe, not be part of the tribe.
But even this pretending to fit in is an imagination process.
It's an act, yeah. I mean, you become kind of, you put on many faces. And that means that you do start to inhabit other skins. And writers are very good at empathy and inhabiting other skins. I mean, all these people I write about potentially could exist. You know, you could bring them to life. It's kind of weird, isn't it? You know, we'd have been burnt at the stake once upon a time.
Did Rebus fit in when he was in Fife?
Oh, let me think. I mean, he lost a parent like me very young, and he had a brother, which I never had. In fact, I sometimes wonder, I did have a brother, he died before I was born, and I wonder if Rebus is my surrogate brother, because I grew up with two sisters, both older than me. And maybe Rebus is that brother I never quite had. But, you know, he left school at 15, joined the army because there was no other jobs for him, flunked that, had a breakdown, and eventually joined the police. He had a very different career trajectory from me. But I don't know. I think he's a typical Fifer. He's thrawn, which means he's stubborn. Scots word for stubborn. And he's, I don't know, man. He's on the right side of history, I think.
Yeah, yeah. Is he like a call, like almost a throwback to an older Scotland? Scotland's disappearing now.
In some ways, you know, because I was influenced in the early days by a novelist called William McIlvanney, who died a few years ago, and he was a literary novelist, working class guy, self-educated, but did these 3 crime novels with a guy called Laidlaw was his character, set in Glasgow. I remember meeting him in '85 when I was writing the first Rebus book, and I said, I'm doing something that's a bit like Laidlaw, but set in Edinburgh. And he signed my book, Good Luck with the Edinburgh Laidlaw. And that, you know, and he was kind of, you know, working class, self-taught, everything else. That was a big influence on me. And Laidlaw was a big influence on the Rebus books, as well as all the Jekyll and Hyde stuff we've talked about. But Laidlaw was quite an intellectual cop. He would read philosophy in his spare time. And I thought, nah, that's not Rebus. Rebus is too busy listening to Van Morrison or the Stones or Rory Gallagher.
There's a philosophy in there, though, isn't there?
Possibly.
I mean, when you listen to music like that, there's an art, isn't there? Something. So Rebus he's in touch with something, isn't he? But he probably doesn't know he is, would he say?
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting that he likes John Martin, because I do wonder, I mean, that's me, I love John Martin's music. I wonder if Rebus really would like John Martin, or would he be a bit too blue-collar? Would that be a wee bit airy-fairy and hippie-ish for him?
There's music that connects to people and they don't know how. You know,
I love it when I get emails and I get people contact me on Twitter and say, I started listening to Mogwai because of you. Or because you mentioned them in one of your books, or I started listening to Jackie Leavin because of you. Or I've gone back to the Incredible String Band because of you, or anything like that. I absolutely love that. I love that the Rebus books aren't just about the books. They're about introducing people to new things.
I think that's what pulls a lot of people into the books as well.
Yeah, well, the titles are all mostly taken from songs and lyrics. And recently, they've mostly been by people that have died. So The Associates, Billy Mackenzie, Scottish, committed suicide. We've talked about Stuart Adamson, of course, who committed suicide. Jackie Leavin, a couple of the books named after songs of his, who died just as I was starting to write the first of those. People will imagine Exit Music is named after the Radiohead song, but it's not. It's an album by a guy called Stephen Lindsay, who's a Scottish musician. Saints of the Shadow, yeah. So what else have I used recently? Oh, Rather Be the Devil, which is John Martin, an old blues song covered by John Martin on Solid Air. Yeah.
Billy Mackenzie's another example of this, you know, coming from, I don't know, Dundee's a fairly big city, but not massive in the scale of things.
But a butterfly.
Created a whole world in his head.
He was a butterfly in a world of moths.
Yeah.
Wasn't he?
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah.
Alan Rankin, who was the other member of the Associates, I've never met. Although he kind of almost shares a surname with me, it's spelled slightly differently. But I mean, he's a kind of unsung genius of Scottish music.
Because he created
those soundscapes, those extraordinary soundscapes, and things that even now sound incredibly modern. And that's one of the things about Scottish music. I don't know if you feel this, but it's very left field. The Cocteau Twins, Jesus and Mary Chain, the Blue Nile.
Coming for another.
Yeah.
Full Kirk. I mean, how did that
coming from small communities, but also just doing stuff that is never going to be commercially successful. You know.
Well, that's it, because you don't think you're going to make it. So why do you?
So you just do the kind of stuff you want to do.
Stuff anyway.
Yeah. I mean, the Cocteau Twins, I love to bits. I mean, my God, they're one of the few bands with lyrics that I can listen to when I write, because I've not got a clue what she's singing about.
Now they, but they use the voice as an instrument, and it's you can imagine it into something else. Can't you? I mean, it's also, finally, I'm just interested in this idea of Scottish, the melancholy of Scotland. You know, like today's a perfect example, and it's that kind of misty rain, the kind of the gloominess, which is a beautiful thing. But that kind of feeds into your books and your art.
It does. I mean, there's a lot of connectivity between Scottish crime fiction, which tends to be quite dark and gothic, and Scandinavian crime fiction, and we both share long winters, short summers, staying indoors a lot, and drinking alcohol just because you've got to do something when you're indoors. And so we produce these melancholy cops, I think, a lot of the time. And have quite dark stuff happening in our books. And I think I think that's definitely part of it. And yet, my next door neighbour but one on the street, Alexander McCall Smith, writes very light books about a detective in sunny Africa, and she's a private eye, and there's no murders and gruesome stuff happening. So I think, you know, the Scottish character is both light and dark. It is Jekyll as well as Hyde. Let's not forget that. There's a bit of light in the Scottish character. We let a little chink of light in from time to time. So the Edinburgh Festival in August is the one month of the year when Edinburgh can loosen its corsets and have a laugh and have a dance and have a sing and everything else. And then the rest of the year retreats back into Mr. Hyde again.
But do you like Mr. Hyde? Do you like that kind of?
I fucking love Mr. Hyde.
Yeah.
Because we all do.
Yeah, you're a big Joy Division fan.
Look, we're all. I mean, why do we prefer Hannibal Lecter to Clarice Starling? Because these monsters are fascinating to us. These monsters, we wonder how different are they from us. Serial killers in general, are they different from us? Are they monsters? Are they something from a fairy tale or a folk tale? or are they just really scarily like us? And we could all do terrible things, John, given the right set of circumstances. History has shown us this.
Yeah.
Given the right set of political circumstances, nationalist circumstances in Germany or wherever, or just a chemical imbalance that suddenly affects the brain, we're all capable of becoming Mr. Hyde. And that's what pins down my crime fiction every step of the way.
And is it a realism? You know, you're just staring the devil again in the eye. You know, this is...
Well, who knows? I mean, I did a TV series on evil a few years ago, man, and it was... I wouldn't want to do that again.
Yeah.
You don't want to look at evil too much because it does, as Nietzsche said, stare back at you.
Yeah, good line to finish on. Okay.
Thank you, man.
Yeah, yeah.
I think the film ran out about an hour ago, didn't it?
Oh, did it?